y'all. Welcome back to Rednecks Rising, the anti-fascist, anti-racist, anti-capitalist Appalachian liberation podcast. I'm your host, Chelsea, and this is the episode of Rednecks Rising that I know y'all have been biting your nails in eager anticipation for. At least, that is if you're a part of the larger podcast universe. This is the episode where I interview Dixieland of the Proletariat host, Nelson. Now, Appalachians, forgive me for I have sinned by bringing a bougie planter class Italian Yankee onto the show, but I think you'll enjoy it regardless. I think we can cut Nelson some slack once he tells us more about being a total class traitor and digs into his family roots and the contrast between the Southern aristocratic side and the Italian working class side. His grandfather was friends with the founder of the United States Communist Party, y'all. How freaking cool. We also talk about how important it is for us as white folks to embrace our cultural roots beyond whiteness, embrace our traditions and practices that let us reconnect with our ancestors who were executed, bombed, and hung as a result of white supremacist capitalism, and thus connect with our shared interest in fighting for collective liberation. We offer up for your consideration, have you ever noticed how Kevin Spacey perfectly embodies the condescension of the accent of the Deep South? We also kick off the episode by touching on how politics and white supremacy are at the root of the boundaries, economics, cultures, commonalities, and differences between the Deep South, the Rim South, and Appalachia. And of course, we can't have a conversation about these subregions without talking about the Civil War. Spoiler alert, it has always been about slavery, in case you missed that. And finally, you cannot get an Italian Southerner and a Southern Appalachian woman in the same room without the two of us pointing out the hypocrisy of Northern and blue state liberals and the problem with the phrase, vote blue no matter who. But before we jump into all of those shenanigans, I've got even more important and exciting announcements to share with y'all. So first up, stay tuned for next week's episode. Or if you already listened to Dixieland of the Proletariat, you might even hear it before next Tuesday, where you're going to hear me hop on their show to do a deep dive into our troublesome beloved Mother Jones. I'm even doing some research, would you believe it? And, you know, who am I kidding? I always research. I am your resident Capricorn Enneagram 1, so you know that I always have resources and citations to provide alongside of the content. But that said, I know this episode will not disappoint. So tune in to the next episode of this podcast, which will drop on Tuesday, or tune in to Dixieland of the Proletariat sometime after this Saturday when I sit down with them. So in addition to that episode, I am also thrilled to let y'all know that I will be dropping a bonus episode later this week where I'm sitting down with an Amazon worker / union organizer from Kentucky who was recently fired and retaliated against for his unionization efforts at a warehouse up there. Matt spills the tea on Amazon's company towns that they've been building all over the United States, spills the tea on their retaliation tactics, and on how the union has successfully been building power up until this point. So make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast on whatever platform you listen to us on so that you don't miss that episode when it drops. Make sure you get that notification. And speaking of subscribing and notifications, even more exciting news. This is such a good week, y'all. Labor Day week. It is time for our very first Rednecks Rising giveaway. The giveaway prize is one of our new hats that you have probably seen if you follow us on Instagram. If you haven't seen them, you can see them on our Ko-Fi. We are giving away in particular a black, what's called a dad hat, and I'm putting that in air quotes, style ball cap, and it has embroidered in green thread the words Appalachian and anti-fascist. And if that is a prize that you would be interested in winning, then you can enter this giveaway by earning points, which I guess you can consider them like the equivalent of raffle tickets. Each point is a raffle ticket. And you can earn those points via any combination of the following actions. Each action gains you 1 entry point. So the first action is you can subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you listen to. So if you listen to us on Spotify, you can hit that subscribe button. If you listen to us on iTunes, same thing, Google Pods, whatever. Then take a screenshot where it shows that you're subscribed and send us your screenshot either in our DMs on Instagram. If you don't follow us yet, we're at Rednecks Rising, no spaces, no special characters. Or you can also send it to us via email if Instagram's not your thing. Our email is rednecksrising@gmail.com. No special characters, no spaces. So subscribe to the podcast on your platform of choice and then share proof of subscription to get a point. The second action that you can take is to then leave a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice. So similar to the subscription, just take a screenshot where it shows that you've left us a star rating or whatever, a review, and then send us that screenshot in Instagram DMs or via email. If you want to do both, you can, meaning that you can send a screenshot of subscribing to the podcast and your rating in the same message if that's easier for you. You still get 2 points towards your giveaway entry regardless. I hope that isn't confusing. So then the third action that you can take is to find the giveaway post on our Instagram page and tag some friends in the comments. Each person that you tag gains you 1 point, so you can tag as many friends as you want. And then the fourth way that you can get points into the giveaway is to follow us over on our Ko-Fi page. It doesn't cost you a dime. It just lets you get updates related to bonus content, merch, other special fun stuff. And you can follow us at KO, like knockout, -fi.com/rednecksrising. And when you follow us, we will receive an alert. And so we'll make sure to add that point to your entry as well. Speaking of our Ko-Fi, if you are interested in supporting the page financially, that is the place to do it. It works very similar to a Patreon. You can become a monthly supporter, but you can also throw a one-time contribution into our virtual tip jar if that's more your style, or you can buy yourself some merch over there as well. And if you don't win the prize of this giveaway, because I only have one hat to give away, sorry y'all, you can still get your own hat over there from the Ko-Fi shop. And then we have a couple of other phrases that are available as well: Appalachian and anti-capitalist, Appalachian and anti-racist, a couple of different color options, and then we have some t-shirts too. So another great way to support the podcast, if money is not your strength or something that you have an abundance of, you can follow us on social media, share us with your friends, of course, like I already mentioned, I think 2 or 3 times, subscribe, rate, review the podcast wherever you listen. This helps more podcast listeners see us on the charts and platforms that they follow. Whew. All right, I think that wraps up my housekeeping business for today, so I can stop talking at y'all for a second and we can get rocking and rolling. But before we bring in the big guns from DotProle, it's time for our trivia question of the day.
Hey, Chelsea.
Hey, Chris.
So for this week, the Appalachians are one of the most biodiverse places in North America.
Mm-hmm.
How many types of plants have been recorded in the Appalachian Mountains?
Oof, I don't know the answer to this one, but I know that it's from my time working on the Nantahala River. It's got to be a lot, because there was like a couple hundred types of trees, I'm pretty sure. Anyways, I guess we'll have to stick around to the end of the episode to find out. For now, let's give a big, warm Appalachian welcome to Nelson.
Is from, well, we don't consider Florida the Deep South, but my other co-host we're all from the Deep South. So I'm from the Deep South, Mark's from the Deep South, Kai's from Florida. But so we are definitely far away. Well, Mark, I guess, would kind of be in the foothills of Appalachia, but when we keep talking about like the different geographies and different locations that make up the South, we are more from the Deep South, which is a different culture, a different history, a different kind of perspective, even a different dialect than what you would consider Appalachia. So I actually just started calling it Appalachia. I was calling it the incorrect way, apparently, for a long time. until I was told it needs to be called Appalachia instead of Appalachia.
Call it Appalachian. We'll throw in Appalachia.
Yeah, whatever.
You know what's interesting is I've actually heard that like northern Appalachia, like up to northern central Appalachia, does use Appalachia,
Appalachia, yeah.
in
That's how I
some
was
of their
heard.
dialect, like specific regional dialects. So, you know, I might have some Appalachian listeners out there who are like, damn it, Chelsea, we do say Appalachia. Why are you spreading this lies about us?
I will admit that my mom's from New York, so I am half Yankee.
Oh,
That's probably where I
God.
heard
Okay.
it from.
I'm sorry. I've got to cancel this episode. You should have told me that before we even got on here.
Even though I was born and raised in Alabama.
I am going to lose all of my listeners. I'm so curious. Why is Florida not considered Deep South?
So when we talk, so a little bit also about my background is I have 2 degrees in political. I have a bachelor's in political science and master's in political science, and I've taken a number of classes on Southern politics because I'm in the South, obviously in Southern politics. So when we talk about the South as a political region and like a cultural dialect region, et cetera, like a different number of things, we talk about the Rim South, which would be like Texas, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, Florida. And the Deep South has always been recognized as South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And like all things, it goes back to slavery and it goes back to racism and slavery and white supremacy. Whereas in the Rim South regions, you had slavery and you had white supremacy. Well, you still have white supremacy. You had slavery. You had things like segregation, Jim Crow, et cetera. But it was always more prevalent and worse in the Deep South. I remember some stories we hear about from the antebellum period during slavery is that a punishment when slaves would try to run away in the Rim South would be like, we're going to ship you down to the Deep South. And everyone feared having to come to South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, because it was so much worse. And when you think about the Civil War and when you think about the planter class and the Black Belt, you think of the Deep South. So it really just goes back to that. Also, when I talk about this in the podcast, I talked about 2 different podcasts, actually. The party switch, the Deep South was one of the last places to really, the Democrats to lose their stronghold, and it flipped to Republicans. So there's a number of different reasons why, it's broken up kind of into 2 sections, but mostly has to deal with everything in the United States, racism and white supremacy.
Oh, what a great way to start this episode.
Yay! Also, I will say, even though it does also tie back to racism and white supremacy, there's a lot of different cultures. People don't realize how like diverse the South is, but also it also has to deal with the economics. Whereas the Appalachian region, y'all are a bunch of coal miners, whereas down here we are all farmers. And, every other bad things that happen because of the very rich soil that we have down here, i.e. slavery.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's actually, I was not being facetious when I said that's a great way to start this episode. Because I don't know. I never obligate my interviewees to like listen to the episodes before they come on the show. But if you have not been able to listen to them, like a lot of I've done basically a 4-part series now that just breaks down from colonial era to the modern day. Like I talk about the planter class, like I talk about how it all, like even the so you talk about one of the punishments being we'll send you down to the Deep South and you'll be stuck in the worst conditions. And even before that, and you probably know this because of your background in political science, but when we were establishing the Virginia slave codes, right, like those were established as a means of separating white workers from Black slave workers by means of like different types of punishments, right? So like if white folks were threatened with additional time on their contracts for indentured servitude, that sucked, and that was one reason that they wouldn't want to work with Black folks. But then also Black folks were being threatened with permanent slavery, like from indentured servitude, and it was basically like, oh, like that's that you are now distinguished different people. And then they started deepening that divide by saying, oh, and white folks, we're going to add time to your contract for every Black person that you were caught trying, like, corroborating with, right?
Yeah.
So I just really appreciate that even the distinction between Deep South and Rim South, like it's always rooted in this story.
I will also say I forgot about Missouri. Missouri is part of the Rim South, even though like probably northern Missouri is probably would be considered Midwest, but Missouri as a whole as a state would definitely be Rim South. It's basically
I can see culturally why.
It's kind of divided, and I hate to say this because there's a lot of nuance. The states who fought for the Confederacy and the states who sided with the Union. So it's kind of, if you really want to kind of break it down along those lines, so a little other background about the podcast. Both my co-hosts are indigenous, and they made the point that Oklahoma is considered the South because the original Southerners that inhabited the South were all forcibly marched to Oklahoma. So they are the original Southerners. That's why Oklahoma is considered the South. Be it the Rim South, it's still the South.
Oh my gosh, that's actually blowing my mind a little bit. I had never thought about that fact.
Yeah, I didn't think about it either until they brought it up. I was just like, holy shit, you're right.
Yeah. Oh, I got chills. Oh man. And you were talking about Alabama and like part of this difference being economics, and we were coal miners up here and y'all were farmers and had this rich soil that worked really well for extraction from the land. And we did have some shared commonalities in economics as we came into the industrial era, though, right? Because we were all kind of in, like, y'all had a pretty strong presence of textile mills down there too, right?
Yeah. So, to take it, I like how you said you start like the colonial period and up till present day, because one of the first things in the better of the two Southern politics classes I took was the professor starts from like the before people even existed on the continent, was basically how the land and the resources shape the politics. Like obviously, because the mountains in Appalachia are full of coal, that's going to shape your politics, whereas the soil in the Deep South and the Black Belt is very rich and fertile, so that's going to shape other politics and economics. But yeah, when it comes to textiles, obviously, but also people forget that Birmingham, Alabama, is named Birmingham because of Birmingham, England was a heavy coal industry town, iron ore, etc., steel, and then Birmingham, Alabama, at one point was like the Detroit of the South, and it had heavy industry when it came to coal mining, the steel industry, massive furnaces, and for a long time dominated the Southern economy after Reconstruction. When you really start to see like industrialization in the South and I'm moving away from the agrarian economy to a more industrial economy. So yeah, for textiles, but also I do want to say we do have coal mines more, and so in the northern part of the state, not where I am. I'm in the heart of the belly of the beast of the Black Belt in Montgomery. So basic, not around here, but definitely up north, about an hour and a half north of me. It was all coal mines. So yeah, so definitely a lot more than just the planter class, and definitely a lot more than the agrarian economy that we're known for. So yeah, you do have a lot of similarities, because obviously Northern Alabama technically is, I guess, the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, like kind of it goes all the way down here. So yeah.
I don't ever personally try to like define the barriers of Appalachia.
You've seen that map that's like the different colors of the counties and everything?
I think really people who identify as Appalachian, it's for a reason, and therefore they get to call the shots over whether or not they identify. And I think just like any other man-made arbitrary line that we draw in the ground, it's ambiguous and it fluctuates over time according to things like resources and wealth and power and people who are living on the land at that moment in time, and so many other things. And so I've definitely seen some folks in the northern Alabama area consider themselves Appalachian.
You want to know something that was like a comedian of all people brought this up, and it was a very distinct difference in I guess the dominant white Southern cultures, right? And it was the way we talk. So you have if people are not familiar with like old school Southern terms, you have the high country and the low country. So people in the high country have that southern twang, like you folks in Appalachia all sound like this. But my grandmother, who was from the deep south all her life, talk like this. So it's the people who sound like Lindsey Graham are the people who sound like you would expect that live in the mountains, basically. And the comedian said the funniest thing. He was like, because he had the southern twang. He was like, people look at me outside the South, and they'll I forgot how he set it up, but he was like, they assume things about me. He's like, no, man, this is the wrong southern accent. My family was poor. We didn't own slaves. It was the other ones who sound like Lindsey Graham who were the racists because they didn't want to work. And that's why they all talk like this. They're all lazy.
Yes, that long drawl versus that hard twang, Absolutely. And even within the high country and the low country, you've got even deeper distinctions between accents and dialects. I was talking about this with Hillbilly Gothic, the trans bluegrass player, who, if you're not following, you should definitely follow her. She's awesome. She's
amazing.
And she is from a more like Piedmonte foothills area of Appalachia. And because there is a little bit of that, it's just a different sound to some of the words that we use. Like some Appalachians are really like washcloth is like a much deeper thing, that like, and I'm just like, that's not really my kind of Appalachian accent. Like I'm more of like a heel versus hill. Like I can't pronounce the word hill with an I. Like I just can't do it.
we on our Patreon After Dark series, we did the whole the dialect quiz that like New York Times put out. But one of the big ones that I noticed was how people say pen. I say like pen. Obviously I say pen, P-E-N, but like southern is like pin and pin are like the same thing. I'm like, what the hell? Like, all right, can we curse on here? I totally forgot. On ours,
I always mark explicit. You're good.
All right, cool. I don't know what I was like.
I throw around the F-bomb like nothing.
Okay, good. Because the main difference out of like every southern dialect is whatever the fuck they speak in Louisiana. I don't know what
Cajun,
the hell.
Right?
I don't know what the hell those Cajuns say half the time. It's like some backwater French that I have no idea what the hell they're saying.
It really is so French. And like Haitian. Is it Haitian?
It's a different type of Creole. Like it's
okay.
From Acadia, like when they were kicked out of Canada and they came down to Mississippi and settled. The Cajun Creole, like a different specific like French dialect that's like very they're both Creole, but it's not Haitian Creole. It's like a different sort of Creole. But I've heard people speak it before, and it sounds like, to me, it sounds like they're speaking French like underwater. Like it's I don't know what they're saying, but it just goes to show you like the difference in southern dialects and southern language.
Yeah. My mom, so part of my mom's family is from the Mississippi Gulf bordering Louisiana, and they're all so a lot. And my uncle, so funny enough, I have an uncle who lives in Mobile, Alabama.
Oh, hell
yeah. And he's from that side of the family that lived or grew up on the Gulf Coast. And so a lot of my family has kind of been like, I feel like I not all the time, but I can understand Cajun folks when they talk most of the time, more so than I would be able to if that were not the case, and I had just grown up around Appalachian folks my whole life, I think.
I just watched an episode of King of the Hill the other day again, where like Bill Dotrieve goes back to Louisiana and he starts speaking Cajun, and it's like and Bobby is like, my flower is wilting. I was like, I have met so many Southerners that sound just like that. And if you want like an accurate depiction of like Southern planter class, it is that episode when Bill goes back and sees his family. Is like they speak in that very sarcastic, slow draw like this, and I'm just like, what the. Even though he's a horrible person, like all of Kevin Spacey's characters sound like every like middle-aged old Southern white man I've ever like from that upper middle class planter class.
So good. That's so true.
Frank Underwood is
and he was from South Carolina, which would have been that deep south. Yeah, exactly.
And Lindsey Graham also sounds like every single like upper middle class rich Southern I've ever like come across. And it's just they have this very sarcastic way about them and the way they speak. Like they can insult you to your face without even you knowing it. It goes beyond the whole bless your heart thing. It's just like a language in and of itself on its own.
It's condescending just by existence.
So
like, that's
fucking condescending.
Just like,
oh my God. It's so condescending.
Just like as soon as they breathe in, condescension. Like that's
child, bless your heart.
Oh God.
What was a good one is like, yes, this used to be a fancy place, but folks tend to wander around these days.
Oh no. Oh, that's just
God.
bottle that. That is the essence right there.
And that's like the southern part of my family is that like my grandmother came from like old southern money and all the horrible things that came from. But like it was really funny. Like she married my grandfather who's in Boston, and the whole
whoa
funny, yeah no it really is like whoa, because like she is from like the wealthy planter southern like bourbon democratic class.
These fucking rich fuckers always bringing in the damn Yankees in here.
No, but that's the thing is like so he was stationed at Maxwell, the big Air Force base after the war, and it was scandalous. They were like, oh my goodness, Ellen met her a Yankee and a Catholic to boot. Like they were just like, oh my God. Like it was like the worst thing that she could bring around a Yankee Italian Catholic from Boston who drinks. That was another thing. Oh my God, those Southern Baptists. The whole joke is why you take two Southern Baptists with you to why you take two Baptists with you to drink to go fishing. If you only bring one, they'll drink all your beer, because like they say they don't drink, but like when they really mean it, they don't. Like I have friends whose like grandparents are Southern Baptists, right? And they'll call it root juice. They won't call it root beer just because they hate alcohol so much. They'll call it root juice. I was like, whoa, dude, that's pretty wild. And all of a sudden, my Italian family is like just drinking red wine by the bottle.
Yeah. And meanwhile, up here, we're just hustling moonshine for
exactly.
neighbors' house to neighbors'
exactly.
You know what I really appreciated about what you were naming around like the land and the resources shape politics, and how your professor really ingrained that in the way that this class was laid out, is like that is it. Like that's always the case, right? That is not unique to the South. Land and resources always shape politics, because it always goes back to money and power and wealth and power, and resources are wealth. Resources are money, and they are intrinsically combined. And even so, in the first part of that four-part series, when I'm talking about the colonization of this country, I talk about how, you know, it was literally a profit venture, right? Like this, America was a business. Like there were stockholders who literally invested in the colonization. They were like, hey, can we find us a few of these real poor folks over here in Europe who don't have any chance of moving up the ladder in this economic system, and just send them overseas and see if they can figure out a way to make us some money over there.
Yeah.
And then when that happened, you know, tobacco, before cotton, there was tobacco.
Yeah,
right?
that was a big one for y'all up there in Appalachia.
Exactly.
Tobacco.
And tobacco, like they were just the colonies failed because they could not fucking figure out what crops to grow out here, because Europe ain't the same. And they finally found indigenous ways of growing tobacco. And then they, like, because of the way that tobacco requires so much land, it has to be like cycled through. Like you can't just like plant it, right? Like you have to have different crops. It's not a crop that can just stay there, and it requires a lot of labor. And that is when we started seeing them ship in fucking African slaves, because they're like, oh well, now we need a whole lot of people to do the labor to work this crop that we finally figured out after we just sent all of these other poor folks to die for the last 50 fucking years before we figured this crop out. And going back to the whole point is it was a stockholder investment that colonized this country. And until we like unravel that, like we're never gonna unravel the corporate greed from the essence of every fucking institution that exists in the United States of America, and honestly, like any global, like westernized pseudo democracy capitalist country.
Exactly. I know you had like questions lined up, but there's a really, really big, because we're talking about distinctions from like your neck of the woods and my neck of the woods. Like the big one is the Civil War. So like I really want, so like,
yeah, and those questions, I just sent those like as a
okay,
like, if you needed something to like spark some thoughts, but
oh,
like
no,
we can go in any
I got
direction.
so many thoughts.
Yeah,
I got so many thoughts. I got so many thoughts.
I'm here for a soapbox wherever you want to go.
So the obviously, even though my co-host was sick of talking about it, and I mean, I could see. Let me go backtrack. Civil War, right? When you see like historians talk about the Civil War, they always talk about battles, and like that shit's boring. Like, okay, cool, we all get it. Like, people fought and died, big whoop. The part that I'm interested in, besides like the like niche little things that people don't know about, like the Fort Pillow massacre and Andersonville POW camp, are like the reasons and the demographics and the geography of like why the Civil War was fought and who fought for what reasons. The entire thing was fought single-handedly because of slavery. I don't even agree with the whole states' rights issue, because there's this wonderful book about the myth of the lost cause by Edward H. Bonekemper III. And he brings up the point that the South never gave a shit about states' rights when the northern states refused to return fugitive slaves. The South
that was the narrative they could grab onto for their actual agenda.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And at the end of the war, when they're like, oh, crap, we can't say we fought for slavery, we have to come up with something else. Then they start the myth of the lost cause and perpetuate these lies. But if you read everything before the war started to turn against them, it's like, no, it's slavery, it's slavery, it's slavery, it's slavery. And because it was solely a war about slavery, and the people who benefited the most from that institution was like the 2-3% that owned slaves in the planter class of the Black Belt. You have huge sections of the South, especially in your neck of the woods in Appalachia, that we call Mountain Republicans. This is when the Democratic Party was the party of slavery and Republicans were the party of Lincoln. Mountain Republicans who voted against secession. So you have a whole swath of Appalachian folks. You see it in Eastern Tennessee, Western North Carolina, Western South Carolina, all up into Southern Virginia, all in what is now West Virginia. We're like, no, we're not fighting this stupid war. Like, we don't have any slaves. We're all poor. Like, we don't care.
That part. There's a literal fucking Confederate statue in front of. So I grew up in Jackson County. Guess who that's named after?
Stonewall Jackson,
which is disgustingly enough, part of the Qualla boundary of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians is in Jackson County. And there's a literal fucking Confederate statue in front of one of the most photographed courthouses in the nation, because it's a beautiful historic courthouse with this ugly Confederate statue. And we literally had more Union soldiers from Jackson County than we did Confederate. Where's our fucking Union monument, my friends? Like,
exactly.
What?
People, like, I looked like, I think it was like 20,000 or 40,000 people in East Tennessee stayed with the Union and fought for you had two armies of Tennessee, the one that fought for the Union and one that fought for the Confederacy. Actually, every single
Appalachia.
Yeah, exactly. Every single southern state except for South Carolina, because they always got to be extra, sent soldiers to fight for the Union. Even in Mississippi, but I think Mississippi mostly was the Free State of Jones, which is that movie Matthew McConaughey, which is I liked. I thought it was pretty good. But yeah, so a lot of the yeomanry in Appalachia and the poor Appalachians that didn't own any.
We weren't landowners.
People,
most of us
property.
still aren't landowners.
Exactly. They thought the war was stupid. So what the Deep South, what the planter class of the Deep South had to do was get and basically lie, cheat, and steal and bribe state legislatures to go along with secession. One of the big things that in the book that I read, The Myth of the Lost Cause, was a lot of lost causes say, the importation of slaves from Africa was banned in the Confederate Constitution. The Deep South didn't want that in there. They actually wanted to bring back the international slave trade, but to get like the Rim South states to kind of go along with secession, they were like, oh yeah, we'll ban importation. But the whole plan, if the Confederacy would have won or would have gone to a draw, was to expand into Mexico and Central and South America and the Caribbean to set up a fucking slavery empire of King Cotton and all the other crops they could grow. But one of the big distinctions from between our two regions would be who fought in the Civil War and what side did they fight for. Appalachia, a lot of them siding with the Union and either not fighting or fighting with the Union and not for the Confederacy. You really see the support for the Confederacy in the Black Belt, obviously because slavery, but also in like port cities because of the import exports of cotton. So it really just depends on where you are in the South, as your region voted for secession. There's a really good map out there. If you like Google like secession vote, there's a really good county by county breakdown of who voted for secession and who didn't. It's like individual counties, individual states are like, no, we're cool. And the cluster of that is in that, you mountain people.
I am definitely going to look at that. I'll probably put it in the show notes too for this episode.
And that actually goes, I don't mean to cut you off.
Keep going.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And that actually goes in deeper during Reconstruction when the South was carved up military districts and Republicans dominated the politics. You see it again during the Jim Crow era. You have what were called when the South was dominated by segregationist Democrats. You have strongholds of Republican enclaves, and we call them mountain Republicans because they were all in Appalachia because they hated the Democratic Party because of the Civil War. They didn't like they either were neutral in the institution of slavery or did not care for the institution of slavery. And they continued to vote for the Republican Party. Were they, grand integrationists that like loved equality? No, yeah. They were racist in their own mind, but it was just like they voted Republican because they hated the Democratic Party.
Yeah. This is not absolving. This is not trying to erase the absolute contributions of folks in Appalachia towards the violence that folks of color and indigenous folks have experienced throughout the history of this country. 100%.
Because you unfortunately see it. A lot of things that I brought up in the episode, the 2 episodes I did on the party switch, was you see the absolute destruction of like the fusion between like Black Republicans and white populists. And the Democrats took power in coups, like the Wilmington insurrection, things like that. But they focused heavily on like racist not even undertones, just like the racism and white supremacy that like poor whites, the animosity that they felt and all this stuff. They used that. Yeah, they pushed that. They used it to break the back of like these fusion candidates. And even though, yes, you had quote unquote mountain Republicans, either they had little power or no power at all. I think in Tennessee, for example, which one was run by political machines of the Democratic Party, they would like allow maybe 1 or 2 seats in Congress for Eastern Tennessee, the Mountain Republicans. The Mountain Republicans knew that if they like stepped out of line too much, they would get destroyed by the Democratic Party. So it's not, like you said, it's not absolving people of their sins of racism, et cetera, and white supremacy. But there is a stark difference between the politics of the South, the Deep South, and the Appalachian region based on a number of things. There's a lot more nuance, as they say.
Yeah. History is so multifaceted, and it is not like the structures of white supremacist capitalism are not as simple as black and white power, no power. It is so much more. And the ways in which they have used, like you said, like racial animosity and tensions, and they have tapped into our education curriculum long before the CRT fight ever came up. Like they have tapped into every like angle of our culture in such a way that it is so much more nuanced than, and it's, I guess one thing also I just want to name my ADHD is like, I have so many thoughts in response to what you said. First of all, I'm like, I'm learning so much, like, and it's so validating to what I've learned about Appalachia from my like deep dive into, I am not a historian. I'm not a political scientist. My background is in social work. So I'm like human behavior in a social environment. Like that's my thing. Not, I always feel like I need to give this disclaimer, not DSS social work. I do not and will not work for the state under any conditions. But like macro lens social work, like, oh, it's kind of like sociology, but with a more evidence-based like interventionist type of perspective. And so, you know, I'm learning so much that's validating what I understand about how I have seen human behavior be shaped throughout time and through the sort of like historical political science lens. And one thing that is so important to me that I've been learning a lot about through my podcast is that Appalachia has been intentionally punished and undermined for the ways in which they resisted the ruling class during this period, particularly of like civil war. And I've always, before I ever became politicized, like I grew up, I didn't even know the difference between Democrats and Republicans. Like I was like, we didn't talk about politics or religion at the dinner table where I came from. So, and when I finally started to become politicized, part of that was like, damn, Raleigh like does not care about Western North Carolina. Like they don't invest in, we have no like shelters for folks who are unhoused. We have 2 across 7 counties in the far western part of the state. We have no public transportation. Some counties have a bus that runs on a very limited route that you have to like call in advance if they have that. We have most of our hospitals are like limited in the types of departments if there is a hospital in the county out here. And there's like so much intentional disinvestment in these communities. And for a long time growing up, I was just like, well, it's just like politicians don't care about us, blah, blah, blah. And that's true. And the reason that they don't care about us and the reason that they intentionally undermine and disinvest in us is because of exactly what your name, like there was a deep history here of resistance and they had to nip that in the bud.
Yep. And like you said, they were punished for it. Is for so long because of the stranglehold that the segregationist Democrats, the Dixiecrats had on Southern politics. They really did punish the sections of the South that did not go along with them in many different ways, mostly just cutting off resources and money.
Economic investment. Yeah. That is power. Again, it always goes back to resources, power.
Yeah, exactly. There's like 2 main theories, and when it comes to racism in the South, there's like 2 main theories that have kind of gone back and forth. You have V.O. Key, who was like the godfather of political science, especially Southern politics. It's called critical race theory, but it's not CRT. It's basically what he says is that you're going to find, and this was definitely the case during Jim Crow. You're going to find the most, I call them foaming at the mouth racists, amongst white people who live in majority black counties, because they fear a loss of power. They know that if democracy was opened up to everyone, they would lose their power. And then he said that counties and places that that were majority white, you're going to see racist, but you're not going to see like the foaming at the mouth ones that you would see in like my neck of the woods. But then there's also theories that have come out in more modern theories that actually it's the reversal now. In areas where there's less black people, you're going to see more foaming at the mouth racists, and white people that live in areas that are actually majority black are going to be less because of integration, because we have to work together and see each other every day. It's interesting because it's very hard to test that because you're not going to go up to people and be like, hey, are you racist?
And like, why? Yeah.
Yeah. So very few people are going to, like, if they're racist, very few people are going to be like, yeah, I'm a racist. But it's very interesting if you want to look at, if anyone is really interested in like statistics and demographics and voter analysis and things like that, Louisiana actually has I forgot, I think when you register to vote, Louisiana, I believe they still do, you put your race down so you can actually tell like who white people voted for and county by county, and who black people voted for county by county. And it's very, very interesting a lot of the results that you find for certain areas. And I forgot what it's coined. They have this term in political science that's coined. I forgot what it's called, but it's basically when white people say they're going to vote for like a black candidate, and then like the white candidate wins, and it's because the white people, when they went to go vote in secret, because voting is secret, they vote for the white candidate, but they'll tell people they voted for the black candidate. So you see that, you can actually see that by the numbers and statistics in Louisiana, and especially interesting when what's his face, David Duke, when he ran for governor and senator in Louisiana, because you can actually break it down county by county who voted for him. And so it's very interesting to see those, and like how the demographics change between like Southern Louisiana, that's majority like Cajun and black and Catholic, to like Northern Louisiana, which is like majority white and Protestant. So those breakdowns are interesting. But that's why like people who are like big into like not even more into statistical analysis than I am. I hate statistics with a passion. So that's some really interesting things. So really, even state by state, you're going to see different parts of different states. You're going to see different cultures and different ways of life. Florida being like the number one, because you have like North Florida and the Panhandle, which basically just an extension of Alabama and Georgia. Then you have the middle section of Florida, which are like joked about as like retirees from New York, and then Southern Florida, which everyone jokes about is basically just North Cuba and like heavily Spanish speaking. So you have a southern state there that is extremely diverse, that is extremely multicultural, with many, many different, not even just religions, like languages and different cultures and ethnicities and everything that's like goes on in that state. It's crazy. Like it's crazy that Florida, people forget that Miami is in the South. I think everyone, like when they think of Miami, they're like, oh yeah, Miami, but they're like, no, it's in the South. Like people who lived in Miami fought for the Confederacy, and it's like their minds are just blown by when you think of that, like how much has changed over the years, like over the century at least. So yeah, I just rambled on there. I don't know how I even got to that
here
point.
for a soapbox. I love it. No, and I mean it kind of goes back to something I've already mentioned, which is these arbitrary lines that we draw and we choose like aren't actually representative of anything meaningful, right? Like defining the South, what does that mean? And defining Florida, like how much of Florida is the South and why are they defined that way? And like even North Carolina, I mean, out here in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, you've got kind of like the northern Appalachian Mountains, which like I've never been to Boone. Like I'm not from the Virginia border. I'm from like the border of Georgia, Tennessee, and South Carolina, which is like a very different place. And then the part of the Appalachian Mountains where I'm from has one of the only federally recognized indigenous tribes, so like I grew up around members of the Cherokee Indians, and then like in the Piedmont area and like the Tri-Cities, which is like Raleigh, Durham, like that's almost more resonant of like Deep South culture than it is like Rim South culture, based on what you're saying and like some of the stuff that I've experienced out there.
And then y'all got the Lumbee people, Lumbee tribe, which we had an interview with.
We have many tribes. North Carolina actually has the most indigenous tribes east of the Mississippi River, I think is the border. But there's a lot of problematic. And I don't want to speak on any.
No, yeah, we did an interview with a woman who's a member of the Lumbee tribe with a PhD, and she talks about it. She goes in depth about all the stuff. Yeah, we didn't know that the Lumbee tribe is the largest non-federally recognized tribe in the United States, and they butt heads with the Eastern Band Cherokee a lot over that. So and then also you have
which is like again a way for them to use institutions to pit us against each other, right? It's like if we can keep these indigenous folks like fighting against each other instead of like there's just the problem
is the federal government. Like these shouldn't have that problem, but the problem is the federal government having that
authority.
But there's the Battle of Hayes Pond. That's what we talked about. How like the Lumbee people like fought back the Klan, like shot at them. It was pretty epic.
Wow. Can you send me a link to that episode so I can drop it in the show notes?
Yeah, definitely. It was a really great episode because like she talked about the Battle of Hayes Pond with like the Lumbee people and the black people in that area like fought against the Klan because the Klan was trying to move into North Carolina more. And they were like, no, this ain't happening. And they literally shot them. They were like, they surrounded them at one of the Klan was having one of those stupid meetings. And the Lumbee people just came out with just shotguns and just started blasting. It was pretty great.
Oh my God. I love that. If I remember correctly, so there's an organization called Transform and See in the North Carolina Climate Justice Coalition, and they work with dogwood. They're all environmental, indigenous, like overlaps of justice intersections. And they were doing a project with the Lumbee tribe, if I'm remembering correctly, where they were doing like an investment project in the community, essentially like a sovereign kind of like community project where they would be able to like I don't know the full details, but there was something. I'll drop an article about it in the show notes too and send it to you, because there was some cool stuff moving in regards to like indigenous sovereignty and regenerative practices and stuff like that in that area. So one thing I'm super curious about, especially now that I know that you came from this bougie ass background, is how did you get so base?
I really do. Like, it's the thing is like I talk about like on the podcast, like obviously, I was born and raised in Alabama, and I know how to like operate farming equipment, drive tractors and heavy equipment because my family had a pecan orchard, and I grew up on basically a salvage lot. We had an insurance auction. And so like I know how to operate heavy equipment and drive tractors and forklifts and all that stuff. But people are like, "Do you go mudding?" Like, so I was like, "No, man, I've never been to like a mud field. I don't know what this is. Like I've never been hunting.
Different kinds of Southern, my friend.
Like, I've never been hunting. I've never been I don't like fishing. I've never been hunting.
You're
I never
truly
mudding. I've never gone mudding.
Oh my gosh.
No, because the thing is, my family, I will 75%.
You are the bourgeoisie of the South.
Yeah, I am. So like 75% of my family are Italian immigrants, and that's a whole different story. Yeah. But then the 25% on my grandmother's side, they are old school. They are planter class. Like they were the planter class. They owned a plantation. They have land deeded. They had land deeded to them directly by Andrew Jackson. They like that whole side of the family is the embodiment of the bourbon Southerner. Like I'd say my grandmother is like, "Oh, I do declare." Oh, it was like that whole Southern aristocracy. Like that is when I talk about my Southern roots, unfortunately, and I hate it because I hate that side of the family, is the aristocracy. I haven't really gotten too deep into that conversation with my dad because he's a right winger and a Trump supporter, and he he's a Confederate apologist, and he likes talking about that side and not the Italian side. I'm just like, I would much rather talk about the Italian side, which is so much better for a number of reasons, and why I believe the politics that I do. Because I was going to ask
if that had anything to do with connecting with your Italian heritage.
100%. The grandfather that married the Southerner, his parents were from Italy. My mother's parents were immigrants. So my mother's first generation, I'm second generation Italian American, and her father despised Mussolini. And even though he came over way before World War way before World War II, actually before World War I, he came over. He was a baby. He was 8 years old when the family came over. He was registered communist, and he knew John Reed, and they used to go to Communist Party meetings together. John Reed, the guy who wrote, 12 Days That Shook the World? I have the book. The founder of the American Communist Party, right? So they were friends because they're all from New York. So they went to the story is that they went to Communist Party meetings together. I got that. Both of my grandfather and my grandmother died before I was born. My mom tells the stories like my grandmother and her went to go see the movie Reds, and my grandmother just out of the blue was like, "Oh yeah, your father was friends with John Reed. They used to go to party meetings together." And my mom told me that story. Was like, "Do you know who that is? Like, do you know who this dude is? Like, he founded the party. Like, he is communism in the United States." So yeah, that's where that comes from, and just like rejecting wholeheartedly I'm a class trader. Let's just put it that way. I reject wholeheartedly my bourbon identity when it comes to my Southern aristocracy heritage, right? I reject that completely and embrace the Italian proletariat, Bella Ciao side of me.
Bella Ciao,
I love that song. And then the thing is, like the lyrics, like what they translate to is just it's so beautiful. But
if you are out there listening to this and you have not watched Money Heist yet, go watch it. It'll tell you everything you need to know about the proletariat.
Oh man. But yeah, so that's why I became that's why my politics are the way they are from my Italian side. The not the racist side, but the grandfather who was the Sicilian immigrant who became a doctor and gave out free polio vaccines and was a registered communist. That's how my politics align. So yeah, I tell people like I am the class traitor because I do not like and wholeheartedly reject the planter class side of my family. But I have to embrace it. Like that's what happened. And like if I could go back and fix it, I would. If I could help anyone that was descended from people who my family unfortunately kept enslaved, I would. And I'm 100% for reparations. I think that it's way past due.
100%.
And yeah, it's something that like, you know, you can't just turn away from it. It's just like, yeah, that happened and I hate it and I disagree with it. And I wholeheartedly apologize for what my family did and what they participated in. And if I, like I said, go back and change it, I would. Even if that means going back and, you know, and shooting a relative, that'd be great. I would totally do that.
Yeah.
As long as like I'm still here in the future. Because I would hate to do like some timeline shift where like I just disappear. But then again, if that has to happen for them to be freed, I know I'll disappear.
For everyone to be free, right? It's like not, it's like, and well, what I appreciate you so much, like just illustrating this connection that you have made so clearly is like that this has been an important part of my journey too, is actually connecting with my people's history, right? Like who are my ancestors? And like they were people who were literally in the Marion Massacre. Like Marion is where my little sister was born when I was living there in North Carolina, like where the Marion Massacre happened. The last episode I just dropped, like union organizers were getting literally threatened by the KKK for organizing the union. And like, those are my people, right? Like those, it's not, the KKK wasn't my people. It was like the union organizers who were getting like threatened by them that were my people. And that has been so important for my journey of truly unraveling what white supremacy is. And like white supremacy, like you said, it's like, I'm not trying to erase the harm that was done. I'm trying to acknowledge it and the ways in which it's also been harmful to my people, right? Like it's like not in the same ways, not at all trying to equate it, like different levels and manifestations.
And we try to fix it. Like we actively try to fight against it and fix it.
And white supremacy relies on us like trying to disconnect from anything other than just whiteness, because if we do that, then we lose our stake in the fight against white supremacy, right? Like it's like if we don't see the ways in which it's also shown up in our like in the pain that our people have experienced, etc., then like it's like what do we have to gain, right?
I was one of the best things I ever heard from an indigenous activist that white people can do is to decolonize themselves when it comes to rejecting whiteness and embracing like I'm Italian American, like embrace
exactly. I'm an Appalachian American.
Yeah, turn away from whiteness, embrace Italian culture, because anything that can break you from that whiteness is something that can better yourself. So like my mom's fluent in Italian, but I like would go to the app and like try to learn like phrases and try to learn here and there. But one of the big things that really like opened my eyes and really like made me like stop for a second, be like and feel for in a moment like the anger and the pain that like just for a fraction of a second, like what Black Americans and Indigenous Americans felt is when I read about one of the largest mass lynchings in the U.S. was of Italian Americans in New Orleans in 1898. They lynched 13 Italians because they were believed to be part of the mafia. There was the story goes is that the police chief in New Orleans was killed during a quote unquote mafia war between the two families that ran New Orleans. And allegedly, the last thing he said was a Dago did it, which people don't know. Dago is a derogatory term that they used for Italians. And so that really, really turned like the Anglo sentiment against the Italians, especially the Sicilians, because they were seen as like darker and swirly. I think that swirly or whatever the term is, sneaky, and they were deceitful. And so what happened is they charged, I think, like 11. They rounded up just 11 random Italians, and they charged them, and they were proven innocent. And the crowd, the lynch mob, didn't care and dragged them out of the courtrooms and shot them and lynched them in the streets of New Orleans. And that happened. And then also, I think there was another, it was like 20 or so Italians in this time period were lynched in Louisiana during this time, 5 of them along the Mississippi River, because I believe the story goes is that they didn't, they were merchants and they sold to black people. Basically, they allowed black people to come into their stores and like that because they didn't understand, they didn't care, or they disagreed. I don't know what they. It's
they
so
didn't
long,
have any
really
stake in.
They didn't have any concept of whiteness. They're like, hey, we're gonna let the people buy our stuff. We don't care. Mamma mia! And they paid the ultimate price for that. And so, like, when I read that and I learned about that, I was just like, these people like look like me, and they had like last names like me, and they looked like my mom and my dad, and they could have been my grandparents, my great grandparents, right? And I was just like, shit. But then, like, to realize that, like, and it, unfortunately, this is actually where we get Columbus as a national holiday from, because the Italian consulate was so fucking pissed that this happened. They cut ties to the United States, and Italian Americans, especially in the North, were like livid that this happened. And then the government was like, we'll give you Columbus Day. And everyone was like, hey, woo.
Oh my God.
Like, oh no. So,
here's a carrot. Here's a carrot on a stick.
And it's like, no, it's led to so many more problems. But then, like, there's another great article, is like how the Irish became white, but then also it's like how the Italians became white, because they were the two like biggest groups that came from Europe that were not seen as white until further on down the line. So it's like how the Irish go. The joke, like, we joke that on the podcast we're an anti-Irish American podcast, just as like a funny like bit. But it was just like, I did a thing. It's like, yeah, and the Irish came over and they went from top of the morning to you, we hate the British, to like top of the morning to you, we hate black people.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, how did it's like the process of the Irish becoming white in the same process of like how the Italians became white? Because like I'll go to New York and those guineas are racist as shit. And it's just like, why? Like, you don't understand. Like, you were only really, it wasn't until World War II that Italians were really considered white because they fought in mass. And it's just like that whole concept of like being assimilated into whiteness and how toxic that is, because like we had to give up, you talk about white supremacy, like hurting cultures and different European ethnicities. Is just like we had to give up our language.
Yep.
We changed our names.
It stole everything from us in order to get us to buy in to whiteness.
Exactly.
Like that's exactly what it did.
Yeah, it's exactly why I don't speak Italian. Why
it's why Appalachians get shamed for their accent and like are told like you sound like a stupid hillbilly, like all of these like that, because that's part of our identity. And like we have to lose that so that we can what's the word, like comply with whiteness.
We can assimilate. We can it's like
assimilate, exactly.
We can assimilate into whiteness. And it's just like we were like, you know, the Irish and the Italians are both Catholic. They weren't looked upon as like being Christians. They had to like either not be Catholic or they had to like hide the fact that they were Catholic until like JFK really opened the door. Because everyone forgets that the Klan hated Catholics too. Like, granted, being born and raised Catholic, the church can go to hell. Like, it's a corrupt institution that's shitty. And it's like gained its fortune off the blood and death and destruction of indigenous people.
Yes.
Like, it's horrible. Fuck them. But the Klan went after Catholics in the South and went after and hated Italians and Irish and anyone who they didn't see as like white Anglo-Saxon middle class people. So yeah, they burned our churches. We couldn't speak our language, et cetera, et cetera. But like the fucked up part is that we became that. It's just like the Italian Americans dropped the Italian and became quote unquote Americans. The Irish Americans dropped the Irish and became Americans. Germans and anyone else that wasn't like white Anglo-Saxon, wasn't like from certain parts of England, really. You drop your language and your culture and your ethnicity and everything and become white. And black people and indigenous people and people of color couldn't do that.
Exactly.
So that's the two-tier system. It's just like, that is like, you're white, you're not white. And it's horrible. And one way to break that, I think, and what I've heard people say, and I agree with, is to find out where your family's from and start learning about that culture and reject. It's like reject whiteness, embrace. It really is reject modernity, embrace tradition, in the fact that reject the modern concept of whiteness and embrace your traditional, like where you're from.
Reject white supremacist capitalism, right? Like reject that, and it's a culture, right? Like it is replacing our culture with a culture of violence, a culture of rage, right? Like we were talking about this before the call. It's like we still have so much anger, and that really is like, that is white supremacy. That is like because we're still living in it every day, and like it still wants us to feel rage. It still wants us to have that anger. And so like when we can look to our other cultural identity outside of white supremacy, then we heal from that, right? Like we are uprooting that culture, like little by little. Like, will we ever be fully healed? No, but like we're able to be on the journey of healing.
And I think one of the most beautiful things that I've seen was an Irish nationalist came over and like toured the U.S., especially Boston, which is like the Irish American stronghold. And she gave a talk afterwards. I forgot who it is. You can find it online. I think I might have even posted it on TikTok. But she said the saddest thing was you can talk to Irish Americans who support the IRA and support Irish independence and hate the British, et cetera, and support our cause. But then she says they turn around and they say the same. They when you ask them like, why don't you support like the struggles of black people in the United States? And she said that the Irish Americans say the same thing about black people that the Protestants and the English say about Irish Catholics. It's like, they're lazy, they don't work, they steal, they're bad. And she like told the Irish Americans, like, y'all are literally saying the same exact thing about black people that the British say about us, and you just do not get it. Yeah. And until you get that, you're just as bad as the British. Like, why are you, of all people, of all immigrants that came to the United States from Europe, the Irish should understand oppression, because they are a diaspora. They came over because they were being starved to death by the British in the potato famine. But somewhere down the line, they, like I said, went from top of the morning till you hate the British to top of the morning till you hate black people, and like became white. And then you have things like the Boston busing crisis, which if anyone wants to see, if anyone wants to read about how Yankees went fucking buck wild when they were told they had to integrate, read about the Boston busing crisis. Like those patties turned into Klansmen real quick when they were told that they had to integrate this school. So that's another thing that I think that both of our podcasts do, and like what we try to do is I hate racists. Like, I really fucking hate racists. But one thing that probably doesn't grind my gears as much as racist, but really fucking grinds my gears is like people from the like Pacific Northwest and like Yankees start saying like, oh, you know, it's much better here. It is not fucking better. Oregon was literally founded as a white supremacist state. Black people couldn't live there until the 1920s.
Exactly.
Like, they had one of the strongest Klan chapters in the nation. Like Chicago and Boston and Detroit rioted, like literally rioted when they were told they had to integrate their schools, like in the 70s. Like, you have literally the summer between like 1972 and 1974, like white Bostonians, mostly Irish Americans, like torched buses and threw rocks at kids and threatened to kill them because they wanted to go to school with their white children. Like, black children wanted to go to school with white children, and they were forced by a judge to integrate. They like flipped real quick. There's that great line by Phil Oakes in the song "Love Me, I'm a Liberal." It's like the people of old Mississippi should all hang their heads in shame. I don't understand how their minds work. What's the matter if they watch Les Crane? But if you ask me to bust my children, I hope the cops take down your name. Love me, I'm a liberal. Because like these folks turn on a dime. They went from Kennedy to George Wallace like that when they were told they had to integrate. So it's not, and Malcolm X said it the best. If you're below the Canadian border, you're in the South. So yeah, the South has its problems. We all know that the South has its problems. You don't have to remind us that the South has its problems. Until she died, I can just go ask my grandmother what she thought of like certain issues.
Exactly.
I just have to listen to my dad rant for a bit to be like, I know the South has its problems. But if you are not from the South and you do not care about the issues in your own backyard and you think that you're,
morally superior,
yeah, if
that's
you're
still
gated white
supremacy.
community, yeah, exactly. Just because you live in a gated community with a coexist sticker on your Prius doesn't mean that you're not a racist.
Preach. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like that is the idea of supremacy at its core, whether it's white supremacy or sexist supremacy or like cultural ideological supremacy, like whatever it is, the idea of supremacy is like there is a best way to be, a right way to be, right? And so when some like middle class white person Yankee liberal is positioning themselves as superior morally, ethically, ideologically speaking to folks in any other area because of where they live or because of the ideology that they claim, like that is still acting out supremacy. Like you're still acting as a supremacist in that situation. It's like you haven't done, you're still doing the thing. You're doing the thing.
I had that. So that meme that was going around like women born after like 1995 can't cook. All they know is like eat hot chip and lie and all that stuff. So I came up with one. It was like white Yankee liberals born after 1973 can't organize. All they know is Handmaid's Tale cosplay. Vote blue no matter who. Watch Hamilton. Gated community. Blame the South and cry.
Hey, those white women crocodile tears.
But yeah, it just pains me because it's just like we know. It's like you don't have to remind us.
Yeah,
we can
literally
go to a family we can go to a family gathering. We can go to a hoedown hootenanny and listen to some of the bullshit that like every Thanksgiving we have to listen to from our families. But for you to think just because you live in a quote unquote blue state that your area is better, it's not. Trust me, I have family in New York, one of the bluest of the blue states. You go out of this city, you drive up to
those leaders are just as bad. Chuck Schumer's donors are Joe Manchin's donors. I mean, they are not.
No, it's like one of the things that like they'll say, like people in New York, for example, will be like, "Oh my God, Alabama, blah blah blah." I was like, I used to work up there, like in the whatever that mountain range is up like 2 hours north of the city, right? Jeffersonville, New York, Liberty, all that stuff up there. I saw more Confederate flags up there than I probably ever seen in Alabama. We would ride through some of those towns on the bus to get up there, and I just saw Trump banners and Trump signs. No, it's not it's the Catskills. Yeah, it's the Catskill Mountains. It's like you get up in the Catskills in New York. It looks like any small town in the South that I've seen. It's just like all Trump supporters, all Trump signs, all everything. And I saw, like I said, more Confederate flags up there than I'd see like around where I live, which is insane. It's like y'all fought like a Union stronghold. And then you look at the numbers, and it was like literally more people in the state of New York voted for Trump than the entire voting population of Alabama. And it's just like the only reason that you're a quote unquote blue state is because of New York City, which also has an extremely racist history and a racist past. Like, let's not forget.
And let's not act riots. Like the Democrats are an anti-racist political party definitely. By any.
I keep forgetting that has to go without saying for people who like don't don't listen to us constantly. It's like, fuck the Democratic Party. They fucking suck.
We are not. Yeah, they like team oligarch. I always compare it to. I don't know if you've seen the videos where I compare it to a soccer game. I don't watch sports. I played soccer growing up, so that's the only one I understand. So I'm like, but I like compare it to a soccer game, and they want us to think that it's red team versus blue team. But the truth is that it's team oligarch versus team the rest of us. And the Democrats are playing defense on Team Oligarch, and the
they suck at it.
Republicans, and they suck at it, and the Republicans are playing offense. And so basically, what the defense's job is literally to be like, oh, we'll get the ball. That way we can pass it back to the offense and they'll score a goal against team people.
Yeah.
It's like, there is not, just because you elect a Democrat doesn't mean that actually anything is changing. Like, that's what they want you to think. It's a fake out. That's the whole point. And part of my whole fucking issue with the electoral system is not just the electoral college, but they literally have sold us the electoral system as a way of convincing us we have a sense of agency, right? Yeah. It's like, and if they want us to, and this is why they dig in so hard to the, like, if you don't vote, you're the problem. Because it's like, God, if you put all of the fucking weight on voting, then no one's talking about mutual aid. No one's talking about collective organizing networks. No one's fucking talking about recreating the world that we like. We can't depend on any elected official to save us. They're not gonna do the right thing.
I crunched. Okay, so yes, everything you just said. And one of my we've had her on the podcast a number of times, Mia. Probably
she did your abortion episode, right?
Yeah, she's like the cornerstone of abortion activists in the state of Alabama. She's like, we are not going to vote ourselves out of this. And I was like, yeah. And I looked at the statistics. I looked at the districts and voting, et cetera, and how it's divided up. Alabama is a one-party state, and it will be a one-party state for the foreseeable future. It was a one-party state during Jim Crow, and now it's a one-party state under Republicans, and it's not going to change because the Republicans have literally gerrymandered themselves into a supermajority. My vote does not matter. Every single registered Democrat, every single Democrat in the state of Alabama could vote in our state legislature elections. It would not flip the state house.
Mm-hmm.
And it is we are a corrupt one-party state because I literally ran everything. If it was, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but basically if it was divided proportionally, yes, Republicans would have a majority, but they would not have a supermajority, and they could actually be debate and Democrats could filibuster. But the Republican Party has literally redistricted and gerrymandered themselves into a supermajority. Mm-hmm. And I've listened to their debates. I've listened to their meetings and their committee hearings. At any time, they can cut off debate and vote, and they win. We do not have a democracy in the state of Alabama. So stop telling me and stop telling us that voting is going to solve something, because it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. And I'll give you an example. Doug Jones won that special Senate election because the state of Alabama's Republican Party and the Republican voters literally nominated a fucking pedophile who is literally the worst fucking fascist human being in the fucking state. And he barely lost. The only reason Doug Jones won is because, one, black turnout was like an ungodly amount, but that even wasn't enough. Like, I don't care what MSNBC says. I've looked at the numbers. That even wasn't enough. What did it was Republicans literally went to the polls and could not vote for Doug Jones because he's a Democrat, because they're just whatever, but they couldn't vote for Roy Moore. So they wrote in like Nick Saban, or they wrote in Donald Duck. Like the write-in vote for that Senate election is insane.
Mm-hmm.
And Doug Jones barely won because of black turnout and because Republicans literally went to the polls and voted for Donald Duck. When Richard Shelby, like the godfather of, like, he's like one of the most powerful U.S. senators from the state of Alabama, was like, I can't bring myself to vote for Roy Moore. That was kind of the final nail in the coffin for him. But Republicans, by God, were never, ever, ever going to vote for a Democrat, but they'll vote for Donald Duck. And that's what happened, is enough of them and enough black people turned out to vote, and enough Republicans wrote in or just didn't vote, and Doug Jones barely won. He then gets destroyed by a horrible college football coach who doesn't even live in the state of Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, who's a moron who didn't know the three branches of government and wants to be a U.S. senator. So voting is not going to work for us. Like, Meemaw is going to be governor until she drops dead. The state is going to be run by evil Republicans and then their incompetent underlings who are just the stupidest fucking people on the planet. I'm gonna get really mad and rant because I did this for my fucking for a class.
I'm glad it's someone else ranting for once, and it's not me.
No, I want to. You want to know how like insidious these motherfuckers are and how incompetent the Alabama Democratic Party is? Is that I listened to the Senate committee hearing on the anti-CRT bill and the anti-trans bill, and I did it for class, and I listened to them online because I didn't want because of COVID, and I listened to it with my friend with Mia, who's like an expert in the state legislature. She knows more about how the state government works than I do, and I have the master's degree in political science because I really just state politics to me is annoying. But I listened, and when I tell y'all, the people that got up there and said that this anti-CRT bill was going to cost the state millions in lawsuits, when they got up there and said people from the ACLU, people from like free speech organizations, was like free speech organizations can kind of go like both ways. Sometimes like really they're cool, but then like a lot of times like shitty libertarians, will be like
authoritarian libertarian.
Yeah, they're fucking stupid. So like they even got up there and was like, there's actually a lot of problems in this bill. It's not written well. Like they laid out the clearest, most logical reasons for why this bill should die in committee. It fucking passes 9-2 Republican majority. The same thing with the anti-trans bill, which was more devastating because you had parents of trans kids get up there and say like, we like my child, we've had to go this and this and this. This is something that wasn't just decided overnight, et cetera, et cetera. Like this most logical reasoning. They had for the CRT one, they literally had the sister of one of the black children that was killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing come there and be like, you have to teach what happened. And the Republicans were like, no, fuck you. The anti-trans bill, they had parents, they had doctors, they had members of the ACLU literally saying, we have the lawsuit filed. We're going to sue you. We're going to win because other states have tried this and y'all are going to waste millions of dollars of taxpayer money. 9-1 Republican majority passes because they are evil or they're stupid. The leadership is evil. The underlings are stupid. So like, stop telling us that's
exactly it. They're stupid and they're evil. So I live in Madison Cawthorn's district, which
not anymore.
Not anymore. But Chuck Edwards, who just won that primary, is just as evil and way smarter.
Yeah, like, exactly.
And that is what and people want to say like, oh, well, get out and vote blue no matter who. It's like, fortunately here in North Carolina, we do have semi-closed primaries, which means if you're not affiliated with a political party, then you can pick the ballot that you want to vote in during the primary, which is cool. But the way that they have it rigged up, and I found this out because I was actually trying to run against Madison Cawthorn for office last year, is you can't run with a party unless you have been registered as affiliated with that party for at least 90 days prior to the filing deadline. So if you're unaffiliated because you're like, I'm going to vote in whatever primary I feel like I want to vote in, then you have to change your affiliation and you have to know that you need to do this at least 90 days before the filing deadline.
Yeah.
And the reason this is shitty is because then what ends up happening is like, I'm in a situation, my congressional district. Okay, for folks who don't know the story out there, the Tea Party got its start in North Carolina. Like they literally, before I was old enough to vote, when
Michael Steele was the chairman of the RNC, Mr. MSNBC.
They were all those Lincoln Project the North Carolina state legislature by planting their little seeds in all of these local government positions and raising people up in North Carolina. We were where they figured out their playbook that they could then use and replicate all over the United States. So when people say you need to vote no matter what, I'm like, all right, my congressional district is so fucking gerrymandered that it would actually be smarter for me to vote in the Republican primary, to vote against some, like, honestly, it's like maybe if we had all voted in the Republican primary and voted against both Madison Cawthorn and Chuck Edwards, then we could have gotten someone who's like a soft core want to be capitalist instead of like a straight up like malicious.
It's like the difference between like Mitt Romney and
vampire.
Trump.
Yeah,
they're both
exactly.
shitty Republicans. They're both shitty human beings. But it really is a difference between.
It's the argument that the Democrats make about their own party, right? That is the lesser of two evils.
And we saw how that worked out in Wyoming. Liz Cheney got fucking stomped. It's like she went against God, who's Donald Trump, and she lost her seat. And like Madison Cawthorn went against the establishment, and he lost his seat. Like you can't, like they like you until you go against what they now believe in, and then they'll cut you from the herd. And so
they like you when it works for their agenda.
And every single one of them that voted for impeachment is going to lose their seat.
Yep. And this is why community organizing, in particular, I think we have a stronger understanding of how this stuff works than just like the term activist, like someone who would consider themselves like an activist as opposed to like an organizer. Because one of the things, at least in my organizing, that I keep in mind is no permanent enemies, no permanent allies. Like someone is only your ally so much as it works in their self-interest. Mm-hmm. That speaks for a group of people, an institution, a single person, like, and that is how like the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, again, team oligarch, their interest is power and money, and they will only like, they're only on your side. They are only your ally so long as you are getting them, as long as you're supportive of that self-interest. Yeah.
And like, I think voting can help in, I'll put it this way, when it comes to ballot initiatives and when it comes to like statewide elections where like there's no gerrymandering, and local elections, I think, are more, when it comes to state legislature, especially in the South, you get fucked. Like you're not changing anything. But I'll use Florida for an example. The same year that Ron DeSantis got elected, a ballot measure passed that raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So there is some. It's like what do they call it? What do you anarchists say? Oh my goodness, I'm blanking. But a diversity of tactics. That's it.
Yes. Exactly. It's so one like, tool in the toolbox.
Voting is cool, but then like, do your mutual aid stuff.
Exactly. Don't lean on it as the crutch that will save us, because it's not going to save us. And that doesn't mean throw it out the door by any means. Like don't surrender that tool. It's still one of the tools in the toolbox. Like we're going to need the hammer at some point, right? Like we don't just toss out the hammer because it's not what we need in this situation. But that said, it's like, actually what's going to save us is all of the things that we do outside of the election that we're able to like solidify with our vote. And there's a great framework for this. North Carolina Climate Justice Coalition is, again, where I learned this framework, and it's the framework of the 4 R's. And the 4 R's are resist, reform, reimagine, and recreate.
Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and die.
Exactly. No, but I think it's so important because I think a lot of folks in movement spaces try to lean into one of those areas, and typically it tends to be like the resist or reform kind of like angle, but it actually does take all 4 of those, right? Like we can't just be committed to changing the machine from the inside unless we're creating ways of being outside of the system, right? That the system can like be transformed into. Like it's just not like you can't. It takes the reimagining. We have to know what we're working towards, and we have to be creating it without trying to wait for the system to create it for us. Yeah,
you have to build, like, whether you call it a diversity of tactics or dual power or vanguardism, whatever, you have to build the foundation. You have to build the networks in order to take the place of breaking down the system. It's not, you just like, people like want a revolution tomorrow. I'm like, yeah, I'm right with you, bro.
The revolution is when you start your community garden. Exactly. And
it's like, how are you gonna feed people? How are you gonna help? How are you gonna take care of people? How are you gonna do this? How are you gonna do that? How are you gonna make sure that people's needs are met? Just because you overthrow the government, or just because you have like a Bolshevik style revolution, they didn't just storm the Winter Palace and was like, hey, we're the government now. They had like everything set up in place, running already.
Strikes have strike funds, right? Exactly. Like they're not just going in and being like, all right, walk out of work. You just walk out of the system. They're like, no, here's the container that you're walking into, right?
Yeah, everyone. One thing that pisses me off, and I whoever's listening, if you listen to this and this pisses you off, whatever. But I hurt a lot of people's feelings with this. I'm gonna hurt a lot of people's feelings right now, especially people who love the ideas of like unions and striking and whatnot. the left's version of like thoughts and prayers has turned into like general strike now, because like everyone, when I've butted heads with people like this before because they really annoy me. People are like, we need a general strike. Okay.
How?
One, do you know what a general, like, I mess with these. One, do you know like what a general strike is? Two, do you understand that like we don't have a powerful labor movement that we used to?
We need
anymore.
alternative resources.
Yeah.
Like I'm a working mom. I can't just walk out of work. Like my kids gotta eat. Like
it's in the single digits. I think. I'm not sure off the top of my head because I'm not an organizer, a labor organizer. But the amount of unionized workers in the United States, like I think it's like almost in the single digits now, right? It's like it's nothing. It was completely the final nail in the coffin was the Reagan
administration. It has gone up by so much in the last year. It was like, I'm gonna say it's gonna be a horribly wrong statistic, and someone's gonna call me out for it. Somewhere it was either like 30-some% or like 50-some% increase in union participation.
So like so 5% to like 9%. So like it's like overall,
which is still that's significant.
But the thing is, like I hate to say that because what I'm saying is like if we want a general strike, unfortunately, it's going to have to come from, if it was going to happen the way it happens in other countries, France, for example, the Federation of Trade Unions or whatever they call this, their version of the AFL-CIO would have to be like, we are striking. We are calling on all the unions that are under our umbrella to stop work on this specific day if these demands are not met.
Exactly.
And that's not going to happen in the United States.
And when they do that, the other thing, and this goes back to like the alternative resources, when the unions make that call, they have structures and they have strike funds in place. They have resources available for the workers who are otherwise going to be losing their source of income. And
then what really I butted heads with people, and it's I call it like the armchair activists and the armchair revolutionaries,
the online activists. Yeah, exactly.
When I brought up the fact that like everything that is necessary for a general strike has been deemed illegal under the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. They're like, oh, but what unions used to be illegal, but they did it anyway. They had guns and they shot people. Like you have a panic attack when you try to order at Starbucks. Are you really gonna fucking shoot somebody? Like, I'm sorry, get the fuck out of my face. Like, you don't know. Like, stop.
The Marion massacre was a union strike. It was a strike was happening. There was a picket line. They had walked out. They were blocking off the mill, and hundreds of shots were fired into the fucking striking organizers, killing and injuring dozens of people. Like that is what a strike is. Like, to me, people are like, it is not just some like we're gonna go have a good time.
It doesn't have to be just because it's illegal doesn't mean. I was like, yeah, but everything that all the tools that were used, solidarity strikes, secondary boycotts, wildcat strikes, everything that the labor movement used before the Taft-Hartley Act was deemed illegal, and you can now fire them all. And like Reagan did with the air traffic controllers union, fire them, busted them.
And before it was ever illegal, they still would call in the fucking National Guard and declare martial law because of the organizing laborers. They would literally say, we have to protect the Capitol, call in the fucking military.
And it's just like, and they're like, well, we got to get more radical. I'm like, all right, tell me when and where.
We're waiting.
I'll show up with all my tactical gear.
We're waiting, baby.
Roll Tide, brother. We'll make January 6th look like a tea party. It's just like, but the thing is, it's like they do that, and these Twitter folks will like say that, and they'll be like, well, what? It was like, yeah, why aren't you fighting for like the overturn of Taft-Hartley? Why aren't you fighting for the PRO Act? You wanna like skip everything and go right to your revolution or right to your general strike. Yeah. You're gonna end up like those poor bastards of the Ludlow massacre, getting burned alive in a hole in the ground. Like, they massacred
so many revolutionary attempts have failed because folks got so fucking caught up in the theory of revolution that they literally forgot like the reality that we live in.
It's like they want to go from like point A to point B without like doing everything in between,
without doing the work. That's exactly it. They don't.
What's that meme where like the kids trying to step up that staircase and like try to like cut like 5 different steps, and like each step is like a different thing. It's just like the bottom and the top's revolution. Like, you just skip organizing and mutual aid and theory and like
building relationships, like all of that shit. Yes. So refreshing to just.
I think the best one, I get it because I mean I have anxiety too, but like it's just like you want to like go out there and have your revolution when you have a fucking panic attack answering the phone, like talking on the phone.
And
it's
that's the
like,
thing too, is like part of creating revolution. One of those steps you're naming is actually healing. And like so I also have chronic anxiety along with like ADHD and numerous other fucking diagnoses, but
one of us.
one of us. But one of the most healing things for me has actually been community organizing. Like when I first stepped into organizing, forgive me, when I first stepped into community organizing a decade ago, it was Obama's re-election campaign.
Obama!
And
I voted for him twice.
Okay, great. I only got to vote for him once because that was the year I turned 18. But that was my introduction to politics.
Was my first election.
Yeah.
I turned 18 right before the election. I got to vote.
You got to vote him in. I just got to re-elect him. Dang it. But
I had my dreams crushed twice.
But the thing is, like, when I first started as an organizer, I was so much more reserved and like socially anxious than I am now, because it literally feels powerful to build relationships with people. Like it heals the internal trauma of like part of that anxiety is going back to like the theme that we've touched on a couple of times now. It's like, that is also white supremacy in action, right? It wants us to be isolated, and like it gives us this fear of each other so that we are less likely to build those relationships. Yeah. And it is so healing to like lean in to doing the exact opposite and just pushing through the discomfort and like getting to know other people and realizing that there are so many people that are here with us in this journey that we can build with is like just a source of courage and hope. I mean, even people who aren't actively in organizing spaces. I have neighbors who like, they wouldn't consider themselves political organizers, but they're fucking pulling 10-pound watermelons out of our like apartment complex garden that we're like, working on together. Like, and that is revolutionary, right? Like that is the art of existing outside of these ways of beings that we've been taught we have to exist within.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. 100%. It's yeah. I like also you touched on like the internalized, like how white supremacy like shows itself in different ways, because I was talking to somebody about this the other day. It was like all white people in the United States, regardless of the economic class, if a revolution were to happen and society were to change, we're all going to lose some sort of privilege, regardless of
there's anxiety around
that. Some more so than others, but regardless if you're like quote unquote poor white trash in Appalachia or you're like some rich person in New England, you're going to lose some privilege because
and part of what
revolution.
Touching on the poor, like if you're poor white trash in Appalachia, part of the threat of white supremacy is that because it makes this idea of whiteness seem like a source of power. If you don't have power in the form of resources and you're poor white trash, then you're going to want to hold on to that false sense of power, like even more strongly, right? Like you're going to hold on for all it's worth. So that, because that's all you have been taught that you have under this way of being.
And to bring it back full circle, like that was a huge problem that you read about during the antebellum times. You had poor white people, especially the yeomanry in the Deep South, that always thought like they were basically they were just wage workers or they were poor white farmers, but they thought one day if I work hard enough, I'll get to own the plantation.
Exactly.
And I'll get to have
they were
slaves.
sold a lie.
Yeah, exactly. The poor whites were like the joke amongst like the plantation owners were like, you're literally at the same level as slaves, except we have to pay you. Like if we didn't have to pay you, we wouldn't. But so we trick you and make you think that, one day you could be like one of us, buddy. Wink, wink. Yeah. But you're never going to be one of us. You're always going to be an overseer. You're always going to be a poor farmer. You're always going to be part of the yeomanry. You're never, ever going to be one of us. But the sick joke is that they were like, but we're white. We can band together, brother. Amongst our whiteness, come on, brother. We don't want those people, to rise up against us. So you're one of us, buddy. Yeah, go live in your shack though. I don't want you to step.
Yeah, exactly.
Take
tomorrow,
your shoes off before you come in. Come in the back door. Take
tomorrow.
Your shoes off. Yeah, exactly. But
Oh, that is such a great note to end us on. And I know that you have a recording session coming up in a little over an hour, so I want to give you some time before that.
And then you're coming on. You're coming on soon, right?
I'm actually I was really excited. I'm so pumped to talk about Mother Jones too, because she really does connect the Alabama industrial unionizing efforts to the efforts that were happening in Appalachia too. And like, she is really a common thread from Philadelphia all the way through the Appalachian Mountains down to the Deep South, where union organizing efforts were struggling, like all of the places where they were struggling the most because of the suppression of the state. Is like, she was there. And so the story is going to be super awesome. I can't wait to be on. And before,
because I obviously know nothing about Mother Jones, so it's going to be a time for me to like not have to talk and just listen, which is great.
Don't you love that? That's like part of I selfishly is why I do interviews every other episode, is because I'm like, I don't want to always have to do the research and all the talking, but I learned so much. Like, I actually didn't know about Mother Jones until I did my episode on her. I knew who she was, but I actually did not know who she was, and I'm going to learn even more when I prep for your episode, because I really just stuck to her time in
Appalachia.
You're gonna prep?
Oh my God.
I'm prepping.
You're gonna be such a good guest.
I am Capricorn AF for my zodiac freaks out there. Like, I don't do anything half-ass in my life. It's you go all ass in.
I've been told I am super Scorpio. So.
Oh no. Oh my God.
An Italian American Scorpio, gabagool. Oh man.
It's gonna be a good time. But before that, and before we wrap up for today, is there any like last like parting words you wanted to share, a loose string you wanted to tie up?
If you want to learn about one of probably in my opinion, one of the greatest events in the Deep South, please don't just listen to our episode on Hammer and Hoe, but read Dr. Robin Kelly's book, Hammer and Hoe, the Alabama Communist Party During the Great Depression, because the Sharecroppers Union in Alabama was, I think 99% black, was probably 100% black. And it was run by black communists. And the Alabama Communist Party was damn near 100% black. The Sharecroppers Union was damn near 100% black, and they were able to fight the cops and the Klan and win. And win higher wages and win better everything. They were able to do the impossible, and basically what Robin Kelly lays out is that the groundwork that was set by the sharecroppers in Alabama paved the way for the civil rights movement. And I think one of the best lines from that book is when Robin Kelly interviewed a man named Lemon Johnson, who was part of the Alabama Communist Party back in like the late. He interviewed him before he died. I think in either the late 80s or the early 90s. And he asked Lemon Johnson, Mr. Johnson, like, how were you all able to do this? How were you able to do all this stuff? And Johnson told him about a bunch of stuff, including Stalin threatening to send Red Army troops to Mobile if the 1935 strike was crushed, all this stuff. But he said the most powerful thing was when Lemon Johnson turned to him and pulled out a heavily dog-eared copy of Vladimir Lenin's What Is to Be Done and a box of shotgun shells. And he said, that's how he did it right there. Theory and practice. Theory and praxis.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of Rednecks Rising podcast. Please don't forget about the first ever giveaway and all of the many ways that you can enter that giveaway. And don't forget to support the podcast by following us and sharing us with your friends on social media. Also subscribe, rate, review on whatever platform you listen to us on. And before we go, I am sure that you are just dying to know the answer to today's trivia questions. So let's get to it, Chris.
Hey, Chelsea. So this week our question was, how many types of plants have been recorded in the Appalachian Mountains? It's a pretty tough one. Almost 1,900 different plants. Also, more than 130 types of trees and more than 300 species of vertebrate animals.
Such a beautiful, diverse ecosystem that we cannot afford to lose to fossil fuels. Don't forget that this week on Thursday, there is an action taking place in Washington, D.C. Please check out the bonus episode 11.5, for more information on that action and the Mountain Valley Pipeline. that Joe Manchin and his comrades in both the Democratic and Republican parties have been ferociously forcing through Congress. So please, please, please support them in their direct action, even if you can't be there in person. And I guess for now, that wraps us up. Lord willing and the creek don't rise. I'll see y'all later this week with another bonus episode.